themes throughout this is the whole glass ceiling thing and women excelling.
I guess, of course, while I was doing it, first of all, the term glass ceiling hadn't been invented. Lynn Martin invented that when she was Secretary of Labor. And I wasn't really aware that that's what I was doing. I just knew that there were certain things I wanted to do, and I felt I was capable of doing them, and I just worked to push aside the barriers, always with a smile. My husband says I'm wonderful at using my sharp elbows, but with a smile on my face, and that got me a long way.
Well, you had all kinds of situations, even the I think, who was it that said that they couldn't accept you as a PhD student because they didn't have enough ladies' rooms. That was the president of Princeton, I hate to say it, in 1958. And the economics department, had invited me to be a student there, and my husband was teaching at Princeton, so it seemed pretty logical. But the department said, you know, Marina, there's one little barrier, you're going to have to go talk to the president. So I went and had this conversation with the president, and at one point he did actually say, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Whitman, we can't accept a student of your high caliber, but first he said, we don't have housing for women students. And I said, well, that's all right, because I'm living in the leftover World War II barracks with my husband, who's an instructor here. And so that stopped him for a minute, and then finally he got down to the ladies' room. And so I got on a train and went to Columbia and got a PhD. And many years later, Bill Bowen had asked me to be on the Board of Trustees of Princeton, which I did for 10 years. And Bill wanted me to go out to Meadow Lakes, which was the retirement home in which that former president was now living. And he really wanted me to engage him in the mistake he'd made. And I said, Bill, I'm not going to go out and bug some 90-year-old about the fact that 30 years ago he wouldn't let me go to Princeton. So that encounter never took place. There's other stories that you have that by virtue of being so heavily involved with some of these things, I mean, you were involved with Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger. I mean, there was an insider viewpoint that I found really interesting.
No, there's no question that I did get to see some aspects of these people's personalities that were not necessarily visible to the public. I remember once running into Kissinger and the president's box at the Kennedy Center, and our son, who was maybe 12 or 13, was with us that night. And he treated our son to the most incredible discussion of world events and his view of them. But the most amazing one was actually a breakfast that the three members of the Council of Economic Advisors and their spouses had with the Nixons one morning in the so-called family dining room. And it was ostensibly to say goodbye to one of the members who was going back to Stanford. And the president, about halfway through this breakfast, started the most impressive discussion. Well, I don't know, is it a discussion? I guess it was a monologue, not a discussion. About geopolitics and America's role in the world as a balancer keeping the peace, and his role in making sure that America did that. And it was brilliant and fascinating. And suddenly he turns to my husband, the English professor, and says, but of course, Professor Whitman, because you deal with students, you know that you can't tell people the truth about why you're doing things. You have to give them a story which will make them support you. And suddenly, there before our eyes, Dr. Jekyll turned into Mr. Hyde. And the president himself had no idea that the shift had taken place, or that what he'd said was in any way an insight, and not a positive insight, into his
character. And it was, I never actually discussed that with my two colleagues on the council, but it was certainly burned into my memory.